Hey guys, it's Will from Nexus Performance. We're here with Broderick, Chavez, Team Evil, GSP, go-to guy for everything in this department. The man with all the knowledge behind biology and how all this stuff works in the body, a bit more than everybody else telling us stuff anyway. And today I've been getting a lot more questions on healing peptides, in particular BPC 157, but on the others too, obviously being in the powerlifting world myself, injuries, more so overuse injuries, a bit more common, and with these peptides coming to more popularity, I guess, seeing way more usage, getting way more questions myself on it from people. So rather than just Googling and just hoping for the best answers, hopefully we can get a little bit more clarity on them. Yeah, so we'll just jump straight.
Happy to help, man.
We'll talk about them. The first one I wanted to know was, like I just said, there's so many websites giving all this advice. You know, this is how you should use it, blah, blah, blah. How studied and how well known are the effects on us? Like, do we actually know this stuff is helpful, and do we know the dosages? Do we know how much do we know about it?
Well, there's a major problem. Is you're talking about products that have, in the general sense, not really been studied in humans. So pretty much all the data we've got is well designed, and some not so well designed animal studies that are generating pretty strong inference. Now, please don't misunderstand that, because that's not really that negative or bad. Pretty much every medication known to science today started out in that concept. You know, they don't just start firing things into people and see if they grow fucking tails. They start with an idea, they apply it to animals, they see if it behaves the way they think it does, and then they systematically move up the tiers. So we're still in that systematic moving up the tier stage. There is almost zero human data, especially when it comes to sports performance where we're applying it. Some of these things, TB500 specifically, has some human data associated with burn patients, gastric cancer, some different things. There are some human studies there that, again, lend pretty strong credence to that we understand how these things work and what they're supposed to do. But we have almost nothing in terms of, you know, repairing my sore elbow. We just don't have that data.
Yeah, I was at my physio the other day, actually, and he said that, I don't know about over in America, but in Australia, BPC has become available through scripts, through the medical system, because there was a couple of studies that linked it to some cancer or something. I don't know, that it was helpful with it now. So now it's available, getting more available through the medical system. So obviously there has to be some data there.
Yes, but it's again, it's a little bit, it's more than a little bit off label. You know, the data that exists, especially for BPC. I'll talk in a minute about how BPC works, but very, very roughly, it improves blood flow to specific tissues in a very general sense. And that can have pretty strong benefits if you have very certain conditions. Now, we're applying it off-label to try and generate blood flow to connective tissue, soft tissue, injuries, that sort of thing. But it does have some strong benefits in anti-inflammatory actions, some things like that. So, yes, there is some human data. But, again, it's not exactly what you're trying to do with it. And probably not at the dose and duration that we're trying to use it.
Yeah, well, we're not... You know, as powerlifters and bodybuilders and whatnot, it's not like we're exactly trying to be amazingly healthy anyway. You know, putting 400 kilos in my hands or on my back is a little bit outside probably what doctors are expecting me to do anyway. So.
Exactly. Unfortunately, the whole reason you need a product like that is, relatively speaking, because of unhealthy, unfavorable behaviors. So now it's just a matter of how do we mitigate it and repair it with the least amount of potential damage and risk. And that's, where we wind up here.
Yeah. Yeah, cool. No, it's just really interesting to me that because it's not like I go to my GP right now and he's like, hey, take this. Like, it's not at that level yet, but it interests me to if we're going to get to that point.
Probably, honestly, that level will probably be an iteration or two down the road. Keep in mind, the products we're using are very crude. There's a lot of improvements that will be made to these products. Drugs go through many genesis before they're really ready for the public. And we will see that with these drugs. We'll get longer lifetimes, more potency, less, some of these, for instance, TB500 tends to cause a little bit of nausea and maybe some hot flashes and some things. We'll get that. Well, I'm part of it. I'm not part of it, but we, the medical community, medical science, will work out those kinks and bugs and get it much more user-friendly over time.
Let's hope so. But the first thing when I say that is obviously like growth hormone has a lot of benefits and it's not like doctors are throwing that at us either. So, I mean, I'm not holding my breath for it.
Yeah.
But anyway, let's jump into how it works and the pros and cons to it. Why isn't everybody on it,
Okay. Well, the whole why isn't everybody on it is a kind of an unfair question, and I understand what you mean, but the short answer is the goal of medicine and the goal of most people is to not need drugs. So the reason everyone's not on it is because drugs are generally not good. Drugs indicate, you're sick. So most people don't want to be sick and therefore don't need drugs. But I understand your meaning. Why aren't all athletes using it? That sort of thing. And to answer that question, we have to actually start with how the fuck does it work? What does it do? The two major drugs in this realm are TB500 and BPC. We'll focus momentarily on BPC. They work in entirely different ways, interestingly, or at least I think it's interesting. BPC is largely an angiogenic proliferation compound. Angiogenic refers to blood supply, vascular tissue. When you get a heart attack, you have angina. It's problems with vascular tissue. It's an angiogenic proliferator. What that means is, a second piece of information you need to make that make sense is, for instance, skin, muscle tissue, very, quote, dynamic tissues have a very high level of blood supply. It's one of the reasons those tissues can heal so quickly. Your skin has lots and lots of blood flow for that very reason. Your skin gets abraded very regularly, and it needs to be able to get access to repair nutrients very quickly. Muscle tissue, the same way. For instance, bone tissue, much less vascularization because it doesn't repair or need to grow at the same rate. Okay. What a drug like BPC does is cause a proliferation of the very fine spiderweb-like vascular tissues that move into a given tissue. So, for instance, if your connective tissue, if your bicep tendons, for instance, had ever so slightly more proliferation of vascular tissue, nutrition can get into them deeper and faster. Now, when I say faster, it's not a lot faster, but in a scenario like repairing soft tissue, every single minute counts. So that's the major role in which it plays. It allows oxygen, protein, and the necessary colloid components to get delivered to these hard-to-grow, growth-resistant tissues just a little bit faster. Now, that sounds like such a win. You're like, well, fuck, I'm just going to take that all the time. The problem is you have a geometry issue. A tendon is only a certain cross section. If you cut a tendon and looked at it head on, that's all you got. So if you start taking up more and more area with blood flow, that means there's less and less area for structure.
Okay.
That's bad. Okay. So you need enough blood flow to keep the tissue dynamic and healthy, but you don't want to start swapping out, walls and supports for other shit because eventually the building will just fall down on its own. So a drug that's so good at causing healing, if overused, can actually cause injuries in and of itself.
Okay, interesting.
You follow the logic? Did I explain that in a way that makes some sense? So it's very, very good to use in two ways. One, you have an injury, I want to get more blood flow in there, I'm going to do that. And by the way, that would probably also be a very good time to be using things like blood flow restriction, hot, cold, alternating hot and cold, because that way you're also driving that blood flow toward that tissue, and then momentarily that tissue is more receptive to said blood flow. Very good idea. Okay. The other way you might use it is in relatively short bouts, a couple of times a year as a preventative.
Okay.
You know, not so much as to abuse the process, but say, you know, at the end of a particularly big strength block, insert in your periodization, insert a period of PPC to potentially undo some of the micro traumas that you generated during that block.
Yeah, we might
now the first thing you're going to ask me, I think, is, well, how much of that is the right answer? The unfortunate truth is we don't know. We can guess, but we don't know.
Yeah, of course. It's a bit, I guess, trial and error to some degree.
Yeah.
It's but I mean, if you overshot that, you know, this window that we want to, and we end up with the side effects that you're talking before, are you going to know about it? Are you going to, like, is there going to be a way to tell?
Well, here's the thing. Here's the thing. Again, I don't want to talk out of both sides of my mouth, and I don't want to downplay a potential major caveat, because it is. But if your periodization is intelligent, and that's a big if, about half the world just left the conversation right there. But if your periodization's intelligent, you're using this drug at a time when bar stresses are lowest.
Yes.
You're either hurt or you've just finished a big strength block. Either one of those scenarios, the loads are intentionally lower now. So even if you did overshoot it, you're probably not in jeopardy, because you're training either at very low loads or volume-based and therefore at low loads. So even a reduced integrity is still well within the safety zone, because you're not doing doubles and triples, which would be bad. Bad if you're hurt, or bad if you just finished a big strength block. So again, it's one of those things where it's a real concern, but it's almost mitigated by the very application, the intelligent application you should be using.
Yeah, no, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It can be a hard one, because you've got obviously optimal circumstances that you're talking, where you use it after a comp. Hopefully you've not injured yourself a comp, maybe you have, whatever. You're going to be doing lower volume after a comp regardless. But exactly, injuries coming, usually like the people that I deal with are going to injure themselves, where obviously like if somebody's 8 weeks out from a comp and they're like, fuck, I've just hurt my leg, you know, but I still really want to do this comp or something, like, I mean, I would be questioning whether it's that needed to do it anyway. But I mean,
that's exactly the point. Is a lot of people engage in these therapies just because it's cliche. Oh, my rotator cuff hurts, I need TB500. When the reality is, no, you really just need to stop training like an asshole. And right, exactly. Now, will TB500 probably help? Yeah, right up until it hurts. And are they, and I'm not being overly condescending here, but my question is, are they that smart? Are they going to be able to pick that window properly? Most of the time, yeah, but there's going to be a couple of unlucky assholes that don't. And I'm just giving a fair warning. That's all.
Yeah, no, fair enough. So if somebody was to do it and still continue training for a meet or hard or whatever, because like I'm sure you know the people I'm talking about. Like, whether you're talking about this stuff or other stuff, or you're like, hey, come on, let's back off the gas a little bit. You're picking up injuries left and right, but they're hitting PBs and they still want to slow down.
Absolutely.
Is it going to be how much of a detriment, or like how much pro and con is there to doing it and still training?
Well, it's really one of those things where it's all pro right up until you cross some magic threshold, and then the negatives start piling on. So, if you're genuinely injured, bringing in additional blood supply starts improving the healing process. That's very positive. But again, it's one of those things where at some point, the sheer act of driving blood in there means that you're not building structural, you're displacing structural tissue for other things. So unfortunately, it's one of those time-based issues. Every day that ticks by gets you closer both to healed and to the tipping point. I don't like giving numbers because it kind of gives people a free pass to just go, oh, no, he said I could do it for 6 weeks and I'm cool. I hate giving numbers.
But people are going to ask.
If I had to really pull a number out of my hat, I would say I would keep therapies to about 4 weeks in a drug like BPC. I think that's probably very conservative. I think people definitely I know people go longer than that, but I think that is about the best safe zone. You're going to get the most benefit and the least risk. I think that's your sweet spot. Now, do I know of people going for 10 weeks? Yeah. Have they been hurt? Not all of them.
No.
So, I will admit that out loud. I will say that. But from what I know about the science, I would say a 4-week zone is pretty much the sweet spot.
Okay. So, okay. So we'll move on. We'll loop back if we need to. But so how it works, we've covered to some degree. Do you want to go into TB at all a little bit? Or?
I think we'll just do that as a separate compound. Let's really quickly, two things about the TB. One, it's not nearly as new. TB is very new. BPC 157 is not nearly as new. It actually first hit trials, I looked it up before we spoke, in 1991. So it's actually got a pretty good background in the medical literature. So you had mentioned that, and I wanted to bring that up. And then the other thing you had mentioned off camera was momentarily BPC is not WADA prohibited. TB 500 is. Now, I was told kind of through back channel, not officially by any means, that the only reason it's momentarily not banned is because they don't have a valid test for it. That was what I was told.
Yes.
And that lines up pretty accurately with other behaviors WADA has taken. They don't bother banning something until they can genuinely confess to be able to detect it. So that's probably what's going on there. It's on the to-do list, and they're just waiting for a good method of detecting it.
Yeah.
So then
it's not like it's a huge performance.
That's something I talk about in my live talks all the time. The combination of growth hormone and these new peptides and peptide analogs are radically changing the face of professional sports. Not so much in performance, although they are in performance, but the biggest thing they're doing is extending careers literally decades longer than they used to be.
Oh, yeah.
Clear your mind and think about this. In the 1980s, there were no 40-year-old professional athletes. They didn't have any. None. People's careers were done by 32. Now we've got people playing professional baseball, professional football, your professional rugby league at fucking 40 years old. We never had that before. That is purely an artifact of these peptide sciences being introduced to sports.
It's an interesting argument, the whole it's not like it's going to make you a hell of a lot better right now, for sure. Not going to, but Yeah, it's interesting. Like, obviously, people are going to have different views on whether it's performance enhancing in that manner. Obviously, like I'm sure you have way more scandals than us, but in Australia, we have like rugby league teams that have been busted for certain peptides and whatnot and kicked out, and the whole team doctors and story, rah rah rah, and the whole country, Australia seems to be a country where when our sports guys do badly, we love to jump on the bus of smashing them, but yeah, it's an interesting debate when you actually know what you're talking about. Obviously, like media and everybody else are going to jump on it. But
yeah, the most interesting, it doesn't really apply to any of the sports you pointed out, but it's the most interesting argument I ever heard. There was a Russian scientist, very, very smart dude in the world of sports performance, actually made a very valid, meticulous argument why it was healthier for Tour de France athletes to actually take performance-enhancing drugs than to try and run the race without drugs.
Yeah, I'm sure you can do that for any sport.
No, correct, but he specifically chose Tour de France, and he showed that athletes that genuinely did it, without drugs had demineralization of their bones, they had sarcopenia, all these, depressed immune systems, and then athletes that use drugs did not have nearly the level of those deleterious effects. And so you could actually say that the drugs were preserving their health against the rigorous activity. So it was a really clever argument. I thought it was particularly devious, argument. But anyway, we're a little off point. Last thing I can
that's good.
The last thing I can really say about the BPC is, again, this is going by both me looking into the literature and then me, doing my voodoo, out in the world, practical application wise. It is my strong opinion that people go crazy when it comes to dosing. Most of the literature did most of the studies around 1 microgram per kilogram.
Yes.
Okay. I have found the sweet spot in my, underground, shenanigans at about 2 micrograms per kilogram daily. So literally a 100 kilo guy, a 220, 225 pound athlete, literally only needs 200 micrograms a day, not the, 2 milligrams and shit you're hearing about. Yes, it seems to take just a little bit longer to generate the results, but not by much. I mean, we're talking literally the difference of a couple of days.
And then you saw side effects too.
Exactly. And you're seeing considerably less, negative side effects, to the point where at 2 milligrams or 2 micrograms per kilogram, you're literally seeing no side effects. No flushing, no nausea, no disrupted sleep, no nothing. Just an acceleration of the healing process at the injury-specific location. And honestly, you can't do better than that, in my opinion.
Yeah, totally agree. It's the same with any other drug. Everybody wants to take all of it.
Yep.
Well, get the 10% extra pros for the 100% extra sides.
Exactly. Double the dosage and get 10% extra benefit. That's just not a good, just not a good trade-off. If you made that anything else, if you made that work or any other thing, that just wouldn't be. You wouldn't do double the work for 10% more income. But seemingly athletes take that every day, and it's just not good business.
Like you said, the athlete lifespan is short. People want to fucking have this idea that they're going to reach the limit. But anyway, another conversation once again. So far, what I'm hearing from you, like the general, just because, like, just from my general reading online, it kind of goes along with what you're saying. Like most people say 250 micrograms a day as a general rule, which I guess would cover, which kind of lands there anyway from what you're saying.
Yeah.
Easy dosing. I think it's just because it's easy to dose that. Like it's easy to measure out.
Typically, yeah.
And that seems like it'll be more, as you say. I know you like to do everything else based on body weight too, so it makes a lot of sense.
Yes, I think that's the legitimate way drugs work. I mean, if you're dealing with a 50 kilo, gymnast and a 200 kilo, strongman, they're probably not going to need the same dose. You're probably going to want to scale that against body weight. But knowing the math, you're right. About 80% of the people listening to this are probably between, 80 and 110 kilos, and therefore you're right. 200, 250 micrograms a day, correct answer. So fair enough.
And I'm going to guess, just because I know these questions in come, but I'm going to guess females exactly the same.
Yes, and here's an interesting little nugget. Even more so with the TB500, which we're going to talk about in a moment, there is some strong evidence hiding in the literature that these growth peptides, specifically BPC and TB, seem to favor the feminine side. It seems that women actually get slightly more benefit per unit milligram, or microgram in this case. There's a lot of arguments why that is. One of the arguments is available estrogen values. Another issue is the possibility that because of reproduction, because of the ability to, gestation, women might be ever so slightly more susceptible to some of the cell upregulation that goes on with these peptides. They're just better growing things in a very general, generic sense, genetically because they have to be. Yes. So interestingly, just know that women seem to get slightly more bang for the buck when using these than men. Now that also means probably, and again, this is a probably, that they accelerate into the side effect realm a little bit faster as well.
Yeah. I was going to say that this is just a completely general, viewing from me, but it's interesting to hear you say this stuff, because I always assumed that the reason women thought that they got so much better results than men is because some fucking dumb guy has said, I take all this, and obviously he's not taking into account that they're female and they're much smaller than guys and blah, blah, blah. So they end up taking a ridiculous amount of gear and other whatnot, and then they get all these results, and then they think they're amazing. But it's interesting that you say that. It seems to be that on paper, men used to be like, men are the strong gender and we're the blah, and then you look at if you jump on open powerlifting right now, I think nearly the entire top 10 other than 1 or 2 are women. So it's,
obviously I'm male and I'm very happy being male, but having said that, I have 2 little girls and a lifetime in the background of biology, and I can tell you with an absolute straight face, I am convinced, top to bottom, left to right, that women are absolutely and completely the superior species on average across the board. Men have certain abilities that women probably don't aspire to. We tend to be particularly more aggressive, better at fucking things up. We have some skill sets that are unique, but in general, women are more resilient. They're just much more dynamic and capable of adapting to stresses. And for God's sake, they can make people. I mean, think about that. You and I have a hard time making a fucking omelet. Women can make fucking people. Like that's pretty goddamn hardcore.
I'm just imagining that the people that are going to watch this video, through your membership site and whatnot, are probably 99% men, and everybody trying to hide their computers from their partners.
Oh yeah, no doubt. But no, they're pretty accustomed to me. They know where the fuck I'm living. So, real quick, I know the conversation wasn't really about TB500, but I thought we glossed over it.
Yeah.
And then
you're gonna get questions.
The problem with tackling TB500 is it's going to require some other shit. So bear with me just a little bit.
No, I'm good.
The BPC works very much in isolation. It just works. It is its own signaling pathway, and it generates the response that it does. No extra wheels needed. Mm-hmm. The problem with not necessarily problem, but the potential issue with TB500 and a number of other growth factors that are going to start getting popular in the near future is they are highly dependent on the overall growth hormone insulin somatropic / insulin metabolism, meaning the more growth hormone and insulin that's available and upregulated the environment, the better the TBs and things down the line work. So TB500 in isolation is actually pretty ineffective. In conjunction with growth hormone, it's wildly effective.
Yeah,
so it's
definitely going to tackle that after this.
Exactly. It becomes a situation where you have to get all of your table set before you can eat. Yes. What needs to happen is there needs to be an elevation in insulin binding proteins, and that comes about either by a high carbohydrate diet or exogenous insulin or both. Then a layer of growth hormone to start that somatropic cycle of growth hormone converts to IGF-1, IGF-1 saturates the cells. So you need those things in place systematically. Once that's in place, now the cells are going to be receptive to a product like TB500, at which case, and now that's where we get to what the fuck does TB500 do? Here's what it does. When growth hormone enters the bloodstream, I've talked about this repeatedly, it does very little growth, and it does pretty much everything but growth. Well, one of the things it does is it goes to damaged muscle cells or potentially damaged, basically any cells that are damaged, any tissue that has damage and inflammation. It, in some way, and we don't even, as scientists, don't even fully understand what way, but in some way it interacts with that tissue and causes stem and seed cells to kind of upregulate is the word it used. But if you look at this under a microscope, there's just kind of all these little cells that are just blank and empty, kind of laying in the grain of tissue. Mm-hmm. Growth hormone comes along and somehow communicates with them, and they turn upright, and they kind of look like a little blade of grass sticking out of the landscape. Well, that cell is now viable to turn into whatever's appropriate to repair the area. Whatever's appropriate is the key word. A drug like TB500 actually, again, in ways we don't exactly understand, gives that cell information saying, hey, you need to fucking become a muscle cell because that's what's damaged. So it basically comes along and programs these blank cells to play along with the order of events. So growth hormone makes the blanks templates available, but then the TB500 says, you need to become connective tissue. You need to become muscle tissue. You need to become vascular tissue. So it becomes what's called cell differentiation mechanism.
Yep.
So that's what's going on. But the key is telling a cell what to become doesn't do any good if the cell isn't already available. So just taking TB500, you've got all this message, hey, we need muscle cells, and you have nothing to tell. It's talking to an empty room. Yeah. No bueno. By putting the insulin, the carbohydrates, the growth hormone in play, you get the satellite cell upregulation. Now there's people to talk to. They can then become beneficial in the healing process. So TB500 is very, very useful, very, very valuable, but considerably more time-consuming and complex.
How so? As in, like, time to work, or?
Well, time in to get all of, if you let's say, I don't ever want you to be hurt, but you hurt your bicep, you take a whack of BPC, you're on your way to healing fucking tomorrow. Okay. If you need the actions of TB500, you need to get diet in place, you need to get insulin in place, you need to get growth hormone in place. 6 weeks have passed. Now you get the TB500 going. Yes, it's super effective, but it's also 8 weeks removed from the original target start time.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
Right. It's a much more convoluted, layered, systematic type thing. Doesn't make it any less valuable, but it makes it a little problematic for impatient, grumpy, injured, athletes that just want to get back on the field faster.
Yeah, well.
So it comes down to people like me.
Impatient people.
Right. It comes down to people like me and you and other good coaches to implement this, kind of get the stage set preemptively so that these sorts of things work. But that's very roughly how that goes about working. And then same thing on the dosing side. The literature's all over the place. I mean, literally, when I say all over the place, like dosages ranging from, almost nothing, microgrammage to milligrammage.
Yeah, I had a bit of trouble finding a bit more like ballpark stuff on it as well compared to BPC.
Right, exactly. So what I have kind of boiled it down to in my, desperate, attempts to find valid dosing is that 500 micrograms once every 7 days,
okay,
for a maximum of 10 dosings. So it comes out to 70 days, once every 7 days for 10 dosings. And then quirky, coincidentally, maybe not, most of the Chinese product on the market comes in 5 milligram vials. So that's almost perfect. That's a vial per course, done and over.
It's just quickly, because you said BPC has these side effects once you run over 4 weeks. TB doesn't suffer the same.
Well, here's the problem. One, that has not been identified. It has not been elucidated. But I'm going to use, this is purely supposition and logic, but once I say it, it's probably going to sound pretty accurate. Okay. What we've got here is your activities causing damage to some tissue. And I'll leave some tissue in rabbit ears, because that some tissue could be your quadricep, could be your meniscus, it could be your heart.
Yep.
So somewhere you have tissue damage, you have cell upregulation, and you have repair. That would be wonderful if it's your quad or your meniscus or your bicep tendon. But if by chance it was the carpal compartment or your left ventricle or some of the things that are a little less interesting to grow, that could be a problem. Now, that probably becomes very sport dependent. In my thinking, I probably wouldn't have, say, a marathon runner using TB 500. More probably, a strength athlete, a speed athlete, those sorts of things. I probably wouldn't give it to somebody under vast cardiac stresses for that very reason. But again, I'm purely leaping ahead and making leaps of logic, because there is zero data on that I'm aware of.
And just on that, I know that myself and you have done a video on health and year-round health and getting the right testings and getting, your heart ECGs and whatnot and blood work, blah, blah, blah. So just refer back to that, I guess, and people should.
Yeah, I would say that an LVH scan is probably pretty useful to everyone, once every couple of years. But yeah, and again, I'm not trying to scare people. I don't mean to be, I'm not scaring people away,
because there are just people in gyms just telling people to take whatever the fuck you want. Like, people need to hear it.
Right. I think it's fair to be the voice of reason and say straight up, hey, I've done this shit. I'm not telling you not to. I've done it. But there are some considerations you might want to take into account before you just go fucking crazy.
Yeah, 100%. No, I get it completely. Yeah.
That's where I would pretty much cover the major points. I mean, how roughly they work, roughly the time frames that they take to do what they do, the approximate dosings.
Yep.
And then the other kind of big bullet point I would leave you with, I alluded to, is no matter what sport you're in, even if you're a fucking recreational athlete, design a year plan, periodize what you're doing, and then look at what kind of stresses you're going to be under at what time frame, and then pick your therapies, modalities, applications to match up with the stresses that you're actually facing. I think that once you start thinking in that fashion, how to use these things becomes a lot more systematic, a little bit more obvious,
Definitely.
and probably a bit safer.
Definitely. Yeah, for sure. It's like I've been doing competitive powerlifting for 4 or 5 years and lifting for a lot longer than that, and still every year it's like I check one more box. It's like, oh, last year I got a bit slack on nutrition, and we're going to check that box this year, and then check that box, and every year becomes a little bit more complex, but the complexity is needed as I get more advanced. So yeah, I get what you're saying.
Absolutely. It's that analogy though applies to everything. I mean, you go to work as a fucking whatever, a bricklayer, and each year you get more and more responsibilities. Your job gets more and more complex. That's not new territory. That's how shit works. That's called being a grown up.
Yeah, I wish it was like a first day where you can just get gains by walking in, but it's just not going to happen.
Yeah, that would be lovely, wouldn't
it? So a couple more little myths that we have passed over. Site injections or usages. You just hear it all the time. People, on my shoulder sore, I'm going to put some BPC in there. Every site I read says a different thing. What's your overview on that?
Well, first of all of the research, 100% of the research is systemic. All of the research has been done globally, sub-Q or intravenous. All of the research is global. Now, having said that, there is maybe, and I mean maybe, a kernel of glimmer of hope that BPC might work a few handfuls of percent better when delivered locally. But there's no one sure, and if they are, it's a teeny fucking bit. Yeah. I would say just go with the global sub-Q and don't worry about it. When you start getting clever and trying to sneak 2 or 3 extra points, you usually wind up, missing wildly and fucking the whole thing up.
Yep.
So there is, I'll be fair, there is a little teeny bit of suggestion that maybe, but not enough to make me interested.
My take on this is that if my knee is super pissed off, like the tendon's inflamed, like you're going to fucking inject some
I wouldn't go jabbing anything in it. No, that's probably not going to work well.
You're a tough motherfucker if you can. I'll just put that out.
Yeah.
But yeah, it is a super common one I see. So yeah, there's that. I was going to touch on the precautionary stuff, but you already kind of dove into that a little bit. We checked off on wider stuff. Is there any major? Let's just talk about conjunction stuff. So if we had the absolute perfect world of, like, let's just say like I've just torn my hamstring or something, super common injury. What is the perfect, like, if I had unlimited access to growth hormone, to TB500, to BPC, to all these other growth factors, like how would you just chuck them all in together? Like how am I going about it?
Well, again, keep in mind, you're talking to a guy that was in a crippling accident and was told would never walk again. And I, squat and deadlift 300 kilos. So I know a little bit about the firsthand, scenario that we're talking about. The catch is this. Some of, not all of, these products work through the same pathway. TB500 and BPC happen, as I described, not to. One works at the cell differentiation level, one works at the angio level. So they're very different in behavior and potentially even a little complementary. So in a perfect world where finances are not an issue and activity is not an issue, more on that in a second, I would say the scenario would be high carbohydrate diet, metformin, high insulin or exogenous insulin, not necessarily high, but exogenous insulin, growth hormone, probably somewhere in the aggressive dosing range. Maybe, if your kind of off-season baseline dosing was 2 IUs, maybe as much as 4, 100% increase to really drive, somatropic action. Once that is fully in play, I would say TB500 in the background at that 500 micrograms every 7 days, and probably about the midpoint of that, then come in with the BPC in the scenario we listed. Now, the key is, I talked about activity. Here's the key. Most of these actions are controlled on some level by local inflammation. Okay. So it's going to be a situation where you're going to want an amount of inflammation local to the injury, but you don't want inflammation elsewhere. So a lot of times what you'll see is people go, oh, I have a torn hamstring, so I'm going to set the world record in the bench press. Well, sure, they can do that and their pecs work fine, but that's also now driving inflammation in their pecs, which then vectors off action of the drug to, sure, it's helping their pecs recover, but that's not why they're actually taking the drug. They're taking it to get it in the hamstring. So they need to really dial down to either truly no training, which is pretty hard, or a very non-aggressive kind of maintenance-based training.
Yes.
To get all of the growth, all the nutrition, all the calories, all the growth factors to go to the thing they're really trying to grow. And that is the error that everyone makes, myself included.
It's a difficult call because, as you know, like to tell people to not train as a person who's that's their life, you know, like it's a hard one to convince somebody of.
I'm with you, but that is the logic behind that statement.
Yeah,
it's like budget. You know, if you have this many dollars to distribute, who's most important in your budget? Who's the most important person to pay? It's that fucking injury. It's not your bench press. That's the, you know, I'm not here to tell you what's right and wrong in your daily activity, but I'm telling you that my version of cost risk analysis says bench press is a lot easier to get later. Hamstring's pretty important right fucking now.
Yeah. Maybe take the I guess 10 weeks that TBE time maybe to chill, which is very hard. But I mean, there are
very hard to do.
I don't want to go into other conversations about there are certainly other things that you could improve in that time, like just health,
absolutely,
cardio, blah blah blah,
intellect. Buy some books. You know, there's lots of things you could do with that time. But But that's very roughly where I would go with that. And then one other little nugget I would put in there is you heard me mention with the concept of women responding better. There's a little argument that maybe it's estrogen. So I would say just as a bonus layer of insurance, I would probably put a aggressive TRT type value on that.
Yeah.
One, because testosterone's excellent and anabolic and all the cool things it is, but it's also an excellent progenitor of estrogen. Just in case that estrogen is important as we think it is, that's a cheap, easy way to get it.
Might even, would you say, stop some muscle loss in that time?
Exactly. It might mitigate some hypertrophy reduction. So yes, I would say that across the board, it's a good idea.
Now, couple of little interesting things you said in that inflammation. Obviously, there's good and bad inflammation, and not a bad thing. But if I went to a doctor and said, "Hey, my shoulder's sore," usually they're going to do, at least in Australia, a couple of things. They're going to throw things like cortisone at you. They're going to throw things like PRP. Is this inflammation? These pro PRP and anti-inflammatories like cortisone or the lower ones, are they going to slow this issue? Are they going to
100%? Those sorts of drugs are excellent at making you mobile and viable, but they're horrible for the actual recovery process. Think about this. It seems like such a weird analogy or comparison, but think about this. You go out and play soccer or some game and you fall down and twist your ankle. What's the first thing that happens? Your ankle swells.
It blows up. Yep.
Why does it do that? What is the biological impetus for that? Two things. One, it immobilizes it, which makes it very much less likely you're going to continue to inflame it. Yep. So the inflammation in and of itself becomes a deterrent for additional use. So now you take an anti-inflammatory, what's the first thing you can do? More shit. Terrible idea. Okay? Second.
More bench press.
Right. Oh, yeah, I feel great. Now I can grind the rest of this joint away. Perfect. Now also, what is inflammation? People use words without really thinking through. What is inflammation? It's Water. What is the substance of life, as it were? Fucking water. How do you get goods and services to the destination? How do you get protein, oxygen, calcium, all the things that are required to repair an injury? How do you get them there? Through water. The body's a river system. It's delivered via the waterways of biology. So again, that inflammation's not there for no reason. It's not an inconvenience. It's there to keep you from acting like an asshole and to help speed and saturate raw materials to the area. So inflammation isn't bad. I mean, until it gets to the point where you're swollen to the point of like cutting off blood flow or something. That's bad. But in a general sense, inflammation's there to curb your behavior and deliver nutrition. Both very good things and very bad things to interrupt.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, so these injuries. This is why it's a tough one. It's because people want to keep training, but then there's pros and cons to all this stuff and how it interacts, and I think that's the difficult question.
It absolutely is.
It's like how much, when, how, all this stuff that we can't answer without particular circumstances. But I think we covered enough that people can at least make somewhat informed decisions. Because I know that
at least give them some strong thinking points, bullet points to think on.
Yeah, exactly. I don't think we're going to be able to ever say this is the answer, do this will solve your problems, but at least give some information so that people can make their protocols as good as they can be. I think the unfortunate thing that people are going to take from this that maybe they didn't want to hear was that rest and not training through things is probably helpful.
Absolutely. It is the best long-term solution. Now, I'm that guy. I mean, if it's right down to, nut cutting and the difference between suffering 4 weeks and, winning a gold medal, I'll get behind it. But at the same time, I will tell you the risks you're taking. Certainly won't tell you not to do it, but I'll tell you the risks you're taking.
Yeah.
So I like to believe I'm as hardcore as anyone. I just think about it a little harder.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's we're not, and we're not going to stop anybody doing stuff.
Nope.
But hopefully put some context in there.
Absolutely.
Actually, there was one last thing before. It just popped in my head.
Sure.
There are some people out there. One myth I have heard is that BPC and TB and blah, 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 like these relatively new peptides and healing peptides. I know we've kind of answered this, so it's going to be a brief one, but some people say that since they're not as studied as growth hormone itself, that just taking more growth hormone would be a better solution. Whereas what you said is combine them. So use them as intended. So like you've kind of already answered this stuff, but it's just one myth floating about that I have heard.
Well, I can certainly understand the logic, the argument. For instance, I used a very similar logic against SARMs. If you have two products and one's 100 years old, really well understood, really acknowledged, and one that's very new, and they do roughly the same thing, I would definitely go with the devil I know over the devil I don't.
Yes.
So I can certainly understand the argument, but when you really look at the mechanisms are sufficiently different and or complementary that using them in conjunction just makes more sense.
Yep. Not cool. Yeah. It's just one thing that I've heard around powerlifting circles here that potentially is something people wonder. Anyway.
And also I would throw on top of that there is a cost consideration. At what point, I don't think these products are quite as expensive as growth hormone is to the average person. So not only are they potentially complementary in synergy, but they might be complementary to your budget.
Yeah, and like I said, if people are getting this through the health system, I know that those other two are available There's just not many doctors that are going to throw growth hormone at you for a shoulder, you know. But anyway, I think we've covered it enough. I think people are going to get enough out of this. If people have more questions, maybe we can do something else. But I think that's way more in depth than anything I've ever read on the internet. So hopefully it's enough.
I'm happy to come back and chat anytime you need me. You guys down there have been nothing but good to me, and I'll return a favor any minute I can.
Yeah, hopefully. Well, I'm over there soon. It's proving difficult to get to where you are, but yeah, we'll talk. All right, we'll leave it there. If anyone has any questions, email myself, email Broderick. I'm sure we'll figure something out. But that's it.